Chapter 2. Veiled Intentions. The diplomatic wing of the Fire Guild complex maintained a deliberate neutrality absent from the rest of Pyreholm's architecture. Where other halls featured aggressive angles and warm color palettes, this section offered cooler tones and balanced symmetry. A space designed to accommodate visitors from all elemental guilds without overwhelming them with fire imagery. Lyra had arranged the small conference room with care. Ancient texts on guild history were stacked neatly on the central table, alongside more recent scholarly works on pre-separation artifacts. She'd chosen volumes that referenced the Crown of Cinders, however obliquely, and marked relevant passages with thin strips of copper. In a corner alcove, a small fire burned in a bronze brazier, a traditional courtesy for visitors, symbolizing the sharing of the element's warmth without its aggression. She'd positioned it far enough from the table that a spirit guild member wouldn't find its presence distracting.
The perfect diplomatic spouse,
came Zara's voice from the doorway,
already setting the stage for complex negotiations.
Lyra turned, relieved to see her friend had returned.
How was your tour with Lord Brightforge? Illuminating.
Zara closed the door behind her.
He was charming, attentive, and asked all the right questions about festival traditions. The perfect diplomatic visitor.
Her expression turned serious.
And he inquired about your research interests 3 separate times.
Lyra's hand unconsciously rose to the necklace. She'd considered casting an illusion over it to disguise its appearance, as her father had suggested spirit mages found fire opals distracting. But she'd decided against concealment, despite having tried and failed to physically remove the magically sealed jewelry that morning. Better to observe how the spirit seer reacted to it, potentially confirming her suspicions about its true nature.
Did he mention this?
She asked, touching the central opal. Zara nodded.
He asked if you'd worn it this morning. When I said yes, he seemed satisfied.
She moved closer, lowering her voice.
Lyra, what's going on with that necklace? You've been touching it strangely since yesterday.
Before Lyra could decide how much to reveal, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. A guild attendant bowed from the threshold.
High Councilor Embersong requests your presence at the Eastern Reception Hall, Magisters. The diplomatic envoy has arrived.
We'll be right there,
Lyra replied, exchanging a quick glance with Zara. They walked in silence through the columned hallway that connected the conference room to the reception hall. Overhead, enchanted skylights filtered the midday sun through amber glass, casting everything in a gentle golden glow rather than the intense crimson that dominated other guild spaces.
Whatever happens,
Zara murmured as they approached the reception hall's ornate doors.
Remember what I said. You're not alone in this.
Lyra nodded gratefully, then composed her features into the serene mask expected of the High Councilor's daughter. The doors swung open at their approach, revealing the reception hall beyond. The circular chamber, with its dome of clear heat-resistant crystal, represented the Fire Guild's most visually restrained space. Pale sandstone walls bore minimal decoration, just the guild emblem and the stylized emblems of the other elemental factions, arranged in the traditional pentagonal pattern symbolizing their historical alliance. Her father stood at the room's center, engaged in conversation with 2 figures whose silver-gray robes marked them as spirit guild members. One was elderly, his white beard and stooped posture suggesting considerable age. The other stood with his back to the entrance, but even from behind, Lyra noted his unusual posture. Relaxed rather than formal, one hand gesturing expressively as he spoke. Lord Brightforge stood slightly apart from this group, his copper-gold robes gleaming in the skylight's glow. His expression was pleasant, but guarded as he observed the spirit mages.
Here they are,
her father announced, noticing their entrance.
Magister Embersong, Magister Cinderkin, our guests have arrived.
The spirit mages turned, and Lyra's first clear look at the younger one caused her to momentarily falter in her practiced stride. He was tall and lean, with the kind of rangy build that suggested both strength and agility. Dark hair fell in careless waves to his shoulders, framing features that were more striking than conventionally handsome. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and a mouth that seemed naturally inclined toward irony. But it was his eyes that arrested her attention, an unusual violet that seemed to hold depths beyond normal perception. Those eyes met hers directly, without the deference most visitors showed the High Councilor's daughter. Their gaze was assessing, intelligent, and strangely familiar, though Lyra was certain they had never met. She would have remembered those eyes.
May I present Elderthorn of the Spirit Guild's Historical Council,
Her father said, indicating the elderly mage.
and Magister Cassius Nightshade, specialist in ancestral communications.
An honor to meet you both.
Lyra said, recovering her composure with practiced ease.
Welcome to Pyreholm.
Elderthorn offered a formal bow, his movements deliberate with age.
The honor is ours, Magister Embersong. Cross-guild cooperation on historical matters is all too rare.
His voice carried the traditional Spirit Guild accent, with elongated vowels that seemed to echo slightly.
Indeed.
Said Cassius Nightshade, with a bow that managed to be simultaneously respectful and casual.
Though some might say fire and spirit are the most compatible elements when properly understood.
His accent was similar to the elders but less pronounced, as if he'd deliberately softened it through exposure to other guild dialects. The statement was subtly provocative. Fire and spirit were traditionally considered the most opposing elements, not complementary ones. From the corner of her eye, Lyra saw Alek's eyebrows rise fractionally.
An unconventional perspective, Magister Nightshade.
Alek commented, his tone light but carrying an undertone of challenge.
One seldom heard in either of our guilds.
Cassius turned to face him fully, and Lyra was struck by the contrast between the two men. Where Alek was all polished elegance and controlled power, Cassius projected an almost deliberate carelessness, as if guild protocols were suggestions he occasionally humored, rather than rules he respected.
Conventional perspectives rarely advance understanding, Lord Brightforge.
Cassius's reply came with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his unusual eyes.
Particularly when investigating phenomena that cross traditional boundaries.
The subtle tension between them was palpable. Lyra stepped forward slightly, resuming her diplomatic role.
I've prepared reference materials in the conference room. Perhaps we could continue our discussion there.
An excellent suggestion.
Her father agreed.
Elderthorn, I understand you'll be returning to your guild after our preliminary discussions.
The elderly mage nodded.
My role is merely to formally establish Magister Nightshade's diplomatic status. Once the protocols are observed, I'll leave the investigation in his capable hands.
His rheumy eyes crinkled slightly.
Though capable and predictable are not always synonymous in his case.
Cassius accepted this with a slight inclination of his head, neither confirming nor denying the implied criticism. Lyra found herself intrigued by his composure. Most mages would have either defended themselves or demonstrated deference to such a senior figure. As they moved toward the conference room, she fell into step beside Zara, who leaned close to whisper.
Well, he's certainly not what I expected from a spirit mage.
Lyra nodded slightly, her mind already cataloging the unusual aspects of Cassius Nightshade. His unconventional manner, his provocative statements, the strange sense of familiarity she'd felt upon seeing him. Most spirit mages she'd encountered projected otherworldly detachment or mystical solemnity. By contrast, Cassius seemed almost defiantly present, grounded in a way that contradicted Spirit Guild stereotypes. In the conference room, they arranged themselves around the table with careful attention to protocol. Her father at the head, with Elderthorn and Cassius to his right, Alek to his left, and Lyra and Zara completing the circle. The formal seating placed Cassius directly across from Lyra, giving her an unobstructed view of his unusual eyes. Up close, she noticed other details. A thin scar that traced his right jawline. hands that bore calluses inconsistent with purely academic work. And most interestingly, a pendant half hidden beneath his robes. Unlike the typical silver adornments of spirit mages, this appeared to be carved from some dark stone that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light.
Before we proceed to specifics,
Her father began.
I must emphasize the confidential nature of this consultation. What occurred during the Embersong ancestral blessing is a family matter, not a guild concern.
Yet,
Elder Thorn observed mildly.
you've included Lord Brightforge in our discussions.
As my daughter's future husband, he has a vested interest in Embersong family matters.
Her father replied smoothly. Cassius's gaze shifted briefly to Alek, then to the necklace at Lyra's throat. Something flickered in his expression, so quickly she might have imagined it, before his features returned to their previous state of alert neutrality.
Perhaps.
Said Cassius, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the conference room.
Magister Embersong could describe what occurred during the blessing ritual. First-hand accounts provide context that second-hand reports often miss.
All eyes turned to Lyra, who kept her expression composed despite her surprise.
I wasn't present for the ancestral blessing.
She said carefully.
It was conducted privately by my father and the family elders.
Interesting.
Cassius murmured, his gaze now focused intently on her.
A blessing for your engagement without your presence.
Traditional protocol.
Her father stated firmly.
The Embersong ancestral blessing precedes the formal announcement to ensure spiritual approval before the union is publicly acknowledged.
And did they approve?
Cassius asked, his question directed at Doran, but his eyes still on Lyra. Her father's expression tightened.
That is precisely what we seek to determine. The manifestation was complex.
Complex.
Cassius repeated, finally shifting his gaze from Lyra to her father.
4 Embersong ancestors appearing simultaneously, delivering a warning about the Crown of Cinders and enslaved flames is certainly that.
The directness of his statement created a momentary silence. Lyra watched Alek from the corner of her eye, noting how still he had become. The controlled immobility of a predator assessing a situation.
You've been well briefed.
Alek observed, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp.
Spirit mages value precision in communication,
Cassius replied with a slight shrug.
particularly when crossing guild boundaries.
Elder Thorn cleared his throat.
Perhaps we might formalize the parameters of Magister Nightshade's investigation before I depart. The diplomatic protocols require clear boundaries for cross-guild consultations.
Of course.
Doran agreed.
Magister Nightshade will have access to the Embersong family archives, supervised by my daughter. He may conduct one controlled séance to attempt communication with the ancestors who manifested. His findings will be reported directly to me, not to the Spirit Guild Council.
Cassius's expression revealed nothing, but Lyra sensed he found these constraints amusing rather than limiting.
And the duration of his stay.
Elder Thorn inquired.
3 days.
Her father replied firmly.
The engagement ceremony is in 2 days. Any ancestral concerns must be resolved before then.
Very efficient.
Cassius commented, a hint of irony coloring his tone.
Spectral communications are known for their punctuality.
Alek's mouth twitched, though whether in amusement or annoyance was difficult to discern.
The dead have had centuries to formulate their message. Surely 3 days is sufficient to deliver it.
One would think,
Cassius agreed amiably.
though ancestors rarely consider the convenience of the living when breaking through the veil.
The easy banter carried undertones of mutual assessment, like swordsmen exchanging testing blows before committing to true combat. Lyra found herself watching their interaction with growing interest, noting how neither man yielded conversational ground despite the superficial courtesy. Elder Thorn rose slowly to his feet.
The parameters seem appropriate. Magister Nightshade has my full confidence in this matter.
He turned to her father.
With your permission, High Councilor, I will take my leave. Extended exposure to fire magic environments is taxing for one of my age.
Of course.
Her father stood, signaling for the others to do the same.
Magister Cinderkin will escort you to your departure transport.
Zara stepped forward with a respectful bow.
It would be my honor, Elder.
As they exited, her father turned to Alek.
Lord Brightforge, I believe we have that council matter to discuss before this afternoon's festival events.
The transparent attempt to separate Alek from the investigation might have been subtle to others, but Lyra recognized her father's diplomatic maneuvering. Surprisingly, Alek acquiesced without protest.
Indeed, High Councilor. The tariff proposals won't wait, even for ancestral warnings.
He turned to Lyra, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles, a gesture that sent the necklace pulsing warmly against her skin.
Until tonight's procession, my dear.
As they departed, Lyra found herself alone with Cassius Nightshade, the conference room suddenly feeling both smaller and quieter. He remained standing, studying the book she had arranged on the table with genuine interest.
You've been thorough in your preparations.
He observed, lifting one of the older tomes gently. His fingers traced the ancient binding with a care that spoke of familiarity with rare texts.
This edition of Pyrean histories is quite scarce. Most fire mages prefer the revised version that omits references to collaborative magic.
Lyra approached the table, maintaining a professional distance.
The original text offers perspectives that later revisions sanitized.
Indeed.
His violet eyes lifted to meet hers.
Just as official ancestral blessings rarely include warnings about ancient artifacts that might disrupt carefully arranged political marriages.
The directness of his statement caught her off guard. Most visitors to the Fire Guild, particularly those from other elemental factions, couch their observations in layers of diplomatic courtesy.
You're very forthright for a diplomatic envoy,
she noted, watching his reaction carefully. A smile curved his mouth, transforming his serious expression into something unexpectedly warm.
I find directness saves time, particularly when investigating matters that have already breached the veil between worlds.
He set the book down carefully.
4 ancestors manifesting simultaneously suggests considerable urgency. Diplomatic niceties seem secondary.
Yet you're here under diplomatic pretense,
Lyra pointed out.
A necessary compromise.
He acknowledged with a slight incline of his head.
Your father values discretion, and I value access to information not typically shared with spirit mages.
His gaze traveled to the necklace at her throat.
That's an unusual piece. Fire opals are rarely used in personal adornments due to their reactive properties. The necklace pulsed once, as if responding to his attention. Lyra reinforced her mental barrier against its influence.
a gift from Lord Brightforge.
Naturally.
Something in his tone suggested more knowledge than he was revealing.
May I?
He gestured toward the necklace without stepping closer. Lyra hesitated, then nodded, curious about what he might perceive. Cassius remained where he stood but raised his hand, palm outward. His eyes took on a clouded appearance, the distinctive sign of a spirit seer accessing deeper perception. After a moment, he blinked, his eyes clearing.
Interesting.
He murmured.
A beautifully crafted piece, certainly, though perhaps more functional than decorative. The careful phrasing confirmed Lyra's suspicions. He could sense something unusual about the necklace. Before she could decide how to respond, he continued. The Crown of Cinders is mentioned in Spirit Guild records,
He said, changing the subject with deliberate casualness.
Not extensively, but enough to establish its existence beyond mere legend.
Lyra moved to the table, indicating the texts she had gathered.
These contain the Fire Guild's limited references. Most dismiss it as symbolic rather than actual, a metaphor for ambition rather than a physical artifact.
Most myths contain kernels of truth.
Cassius quoted her breakfast statement with a knowing look that sent an unexpected shiver along her spine. Had he been watching her earlier? Or was it coincidence?
You've researched the crown specifically?
She asked, redirecting the conversation.
Among other pre-separation artifacts.
He moved around the table, maintaining a respectful distance while examining the marked passages in her books.
My particular interest lies in objects that bridge elemental boundaries, items that challenge the assumed incompatibility of different magical affinities.
This aligned with his earlier provocative statement about fire and spirit compatibility.
The guild's separation is founded on centuries of evidence that mixing elements leads to instability,
she said, curious about his response. Cassius looked up from the text he was examining, his unusual eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity.
Does it? Or is that what centuries of guild politics have conditioned us to believe?
The question resonated uncomfortably with doubts Lyra had harbored during her own secret study of cross-elemental techniques. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of her unorthodox thinking, he continued.
Consider the ancestral warning, enslaved flames. An odd phrase, don't you think? Fire magic is traditionally associated with freedom, volatility, passion. How does one enslave a flame without fundamentally changing its nature?
His fingers tapped thoughtfully on the open book.
Unless, perhaps, the Crown of Cinders was designed to do exactly that. Harness fire magic in ways that violate its essential character. The insight struck Lyra with surprising force. She had interpreted the ancestral warning primarily as a political caution against her marriage alliance. Cassius had immediately grasped a magical dimension she hadn't fully considered.
If that's true,
she said slowly,
then the warning might not be about preventing the union itself, but about preventing misuse of combined magical heritage.
Her mind raced with implications.
The Embersong line has always had unusual connections to ancestral fire magic. If combined with Lord Brightforge's research into ancient techniques,
the potential applications could be significant.
Cassius finished, watching her with growing interest.
And potentially concerning enough for multiple ancestors to expend considerable energy delivering a warning.
They stood on opposite sides of the table, connected by the intellectual current flowing between them. Lyra found herself responding to his analytical approach, so different from the political calculations that dominated most conversations in the Fire Guild. He thought like a researcher, not a diplomat or politician.
We should examine the Hall of Ancestors,
she suggested, making a decision.
The manifestation occurred there, and residual spectral energy might provide additional insights before you attempt direct communication.
Cassius nodded, his expression shifting to one of professional focus.
An excellent suggestion. Spectral imprints can sometimes reveal more than deliberately crafted messages.
As they gathered the most relevant texts to take with them, Lyra found herself studying him with growing curiosity. Everything about Cassius Nightshade contradicted her expectations of a spirit mage. From his direct manner, to his practical approach, to his surprising insights about fire magic. Rather than the ethereal detachment typical of his guild, he exhibited an engaged intensity that seemed more aligned with fire temperaments than spirit ones.
You don't fit the typical spirit mage profile,
she observed as they prepared to leave. His mouth quirked into that unexpected smile again.
No more than you fit the typical fire mage profile, Magister Embersong.
The comment startled her.
What do you mean?
Cassius gestured toward the books she had selected. Volumes that challenged guild orthodoxy rather than reinforcing it.
Your research interests, your analytical approach, your...
His gaze flicked briefly to her hands.
Calices, which suggest practical application rather than merely theoretical study.
He met her eyes directly.
Most fire mages with your lineage and position would be content with mastering traditional techniques and political advancement.
The accuracy of his assessment was unsettling. Few people looked beyond her family name and formal demeanor to see her unorthodox interests.
You're very observant.
It's a requirement in my line of work,
he replied.
The dead rarely state their concerns directly. One must learn to notice details others miss.
They exited the conference room together, Lyra leading the way toward the Hall of Ancestors. As they walked through the less populated corridors of the diplomatic wing, she found herself increasingly aware of his presence beside her. Not imposing like Alek's carefully projected strength, but containing an underlying certainty that required no external display.
Your father mentioned you weren't informed about the ancestral blessing,
Cassius said as they turned into the eastern corridor.
Yet you seem unsurprised by the warning itself. almost as if you'd anticipated complications.
The observation was too perceptive to dismiss. Lyra considered how much to reveal about her own misgivings regarding her engagement. Misgivings that had existed even before the necklace's manipulation had confirmed them.
Let's just say that political marriages rarely involve simple emotions,
She replied carefully.
Particularly when one party has ambitions that might extend beyond the conventional boundaries of guild power.
His tone was casual, but his words struck close to her private concerns about Alek's true motivations. Before she could respond, they rounded a corner and nearly collided with a group of guild apprentices being escorted on a festival tour. Their young faces lit with recognition at the sight of Lyra, then shifted to curiosity as they noticed her unusual companion.
Magister Embersong,
Exclaimed their guide, a junior instructor named Peller.
what an honor to encounter you during our historical tour.
His gaze moved uncertainly to Cassius, clearly recognizing the Spirit Guild robes but unsure of the protocol for introducing such a visitor to impressionable students.
Instructor Peller. Isurger Sangi Wensand.
Lyra acknowledged with a polite nod.
You've chosen an excellent day to showcase our guild's heritage. This is Magister Nightshade, a diplomatic visitor, assisting with historical research.
The carefully worded introduction revealed nothing of Cassius's true purpose while explaining his presence. The apprentices, mostly between 12 and 14 years old, stared at Cassius with undisguised fascination. Spirit mages rarely visited the Fire Guild openly, and his unusual appearance only heightened their interest.
Is it true spirit mages can see ghosts all the time?
Blurted one bold girl before her instructor could stop her. Rather than taking offense at the blunt question, Cassius crouched slightly to meet the girl at eye level.
Not ghosts in the way most people think of them.
He explained, his voice taking on a natural warmth that surprised Lyra.
We perceive echoes, impressions left behind by strong emotions and significant events, like feeling the heat from a fire that burned hours ago, even when the flames are no longer visible.
The fire analogy was perfectly chosen for young fire mages, translating spirit concepts into terms they could understand. The girl nodded, clearly satisfied with the explanation.
Do fire mages leave stronger echoes than other guilds?
Asked another apprentice, a serious-looking boy with scholarly spectacles.
An excellent question.
Cassius replied, appearing genuinely impressed.
They often do, particularly those with deep emotional connections to their magic. Passion, whether in life or magic, tends to leave the most vivid impressions across the veil.
Instructor Peller seemed torn between hurrying his charges along and allowing this unexpected educational moment to continue. The apprentice's enthusiasm obviously pleased him, but the impropriety of extended interaction with a spirit mage clearly concerned him. Lyra intervened smoothly.
Perhaps Magister Nightshade might visit your advanced theory class before his departure. A cross-guild perspective would complement your excellent instruction on elemental foundations.
The compromise allowed Peller to preserve protocol, while promising the students further satisfaction of their curiosity.
We would be honored.
He said, visibly relieved.
If the diplomatic schedule permits, of course.
I'll do my best to arrange it.
Cassius said, straightening to his full height again.
Curiosity should always be encouraged, regardless of guild boundaries.
As the apprentices continued their tour, Lyra noticed how Cassius watched them go with genuine interest rather than the polite dismissal most adult mages showed toward students not their own.
You're good with children,
she observed as they resumed their journey toward the Hall of Ancestors.
They ask better questions than adults.
He replied simply.
They haven't yet learned which curiosities are politically acceptable to voice.
The statement carried an undertone of criticism toward guild restrictions that aligned surprisingly well with Lyra's private thoughts. Once again, she found herself reassessing her assumptions about this unusual spirit seer. They walked in companionable silence until reaching the massive doors of the Hall of Ancestors, which stood closed and guarded by two ceremonial sentinels in formal Fire Guild regalia.
Magister Embersong.
The senior guard acknowledged with a respectful bow.
The hall is sealed until tomorrow's pre-ceremony rituals.
By whose authority?
Lyra asked. though she suspected the answer.
Lord Brightforge requested special preparations for tomorrow's ancestral acknowledgement.
The guard replied.
Guild artificers are enhancing the eternal flame's receptivity to ensure clear communication during the ceremony.
Lyra exchanged a quick glance with Cassius, whose expression revealed nothing but whose eyes had sharpened with interest. Alek had effectively blocked their access to the precise location where the ancestral warning had occurred, a move that seemed suspiciously convenient.
I see,
Lyra said, maintaining her composed demeanor despite her frustration.
Please inform the artificers that will return tomorrow morning. The diplomatic schedule requires flexibility.
As they moved away from the sealed hall, Cassius waited until they were beyond the guard's hearing before murmuring.
Convenient timing for enhancing the eternal flame.
Indeed,
Lyra agreed quietly.
Particularly since such preparations typically require only hours, not days.
It seems Lord Brightforge prefers to control access to ancestral communications.
He observed.
Almost as if he's concerned about what they might reveal.
The necklace at Lyra's throat pulsed once, warmly, as if responding to the implied criticism of its giver. She reinforced her mental barrier against its influence, a gesture that didn't escape Cassius's notice.
That necklace,
he said carefully,
seems to respond to certain conversational triggers.
The oblique comment offered an opening, a chance to confirm whether her suspicions about the necklace's enchantment were justified. But trusting a spirit mage she'd just met, regardless of his insight or apparent sincerity, carried significant risk. Before she could decide how to respond, a familiar voice called her name from the adjoining corridor.
Lyra, there you are.
Zara approached quickly, her expression controlled but her eyes communicating urgency.
Your father requests your presence for the festival committee meeting. Immediately.
The interruption couldn't be coincidental. Either her father actually needed her, or Zara had engineered a reason to speak with her privately.
Of course,
Lyra replied smoothly. She turned to Cassius.
Magister Nightshade, I apologize for the interruption. Perhaps you might review the texts we've gathered while I attend to this obligation. The guest study in the diplomatic wing has been prepared for your use.
Certainly.
Cassius agreed, his violet eyes moving between the two women with perceptive interest.
Guild festivities must take precedence. We can continue our historical discussions afterward.
As Zara led her away, Lyra found herself glancing back at the spirit seer, who stood watching their departure with an unreadable expression. Despite their brief acquaintance, she sensed he had already formed theories about the ancestral warning, the Crown of Cinders, and possibly even the nature of her relationship with Alek. What she couldn't determine was whether those theories made him a potential ally, or simply another complication in an already dangerous situation. Either way, Cassius Nightshade was unlike any spirit mage she had encountered, and far more intriguing than she had anticipated. As soon as they turned the corner, safely out of Cassius's sight and hearing, Zara pulled Lyra into an empty alcove tucked between two ornamental columns. The small space, designed for private conversations during diplomatic functions, was enchanted with minor privacy wards that blurred sound beyond its boundaries.
Tell me that wasn't what it looked like,
Zara whispered, her dark eyes wide with urgency.
What looked like?
Lyra asked, though she suspected her friend's meaning.
You and that spirit mage, looking at each other like you were the only two people who speak the same language.
Zara ran a hand through her short dark hair, a gesture she reserved for moments of genuine agitation.
Lyra, I was gone for less than an hour.
We were discussing the ancestral warning,
Lyra replied, keeping her voice measured despite the warmth creeping into her cheeks.
He has insights about the Crown of Cinders that align with some of my research.
Zara's skeptical expression softened into something more speculative.
And those insights just happened to come wrapped in a rather appealing package, in a brooding, mysterious sort of way.
Zara!
What? I'm just acknowledging what anyone with eyes would notice.
Zara leaned against the alcove wall, folding her arms.
Those violet eyes are unusual. And that whole, I'm too focused on cosmic mysteries to care about my appearance thing he has going on is oddly compelling. Even the way he moves, like he's constantly aware of worlds the rest of us can't see.
Lyra sighed.
We have significantly more important matters to discuss than Magister Nightshade's physical appearance.
Of course.
Zara agreed, though her knowing smile remained.
Like why Lord Brightforge had the Hall of Ancestors sealed immediately after your father announced the Spirit Seer's involvement.
That caught Lyra's full attention.
You saw this happen?
Better. I heard him give the order.
Zara's expression turned serious.
During our festival tour, we encountered Guildmaster Voren. Lord Brightforge asked for a private word, but I lingered just within earshot. He requested special preparations for the Eternal Flame, something about ensuring appropriate ancestral communications during the engagement ceremony.
Appropriate?
Lyra repeated, the words striking her as particularly significant.
His exact phrasing was, ensuring the ancestors convey appropriate blessings rather than confusing portents.
Zara's eyes narrowed.
As if he could dictate what your ancestors should say.
The necklace at Lyra's throat pulsed warmly, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. She pressed her hand against it, reinforcing her mental barriers against its influence. Zara didn't miss the gesture.
Lyra, what's going on with that necklace? You keep touching it like it's doing something to you.
The moment had come to trust someone with the truth, or at least part of it. Lyra drew a deep breath.
It is. Doing something,
She glanced toward the alcove entrance, ensuring they remained alone.
The fire opals are enchanted. They're attempting to influence my emotions, particularly regarding Alek.
Influence how?
Zara asked, her voice dropping even lower.
Creating artificial feelings of attraction, warmth, trust.
Lyra struggled to articulate the necklace's effects without revealing the more intimate sensations it sometimes triggered.
And redirecting negative thoughts about him. I've been fighting it since he gave it to me, but it's persistent.
That's forbidden magic.
Zara whispered, horror dawning in her eyes.
Emotional manipulation enchantments were banned after the Guild Wars. They're classified as consent violations under the Elemental Accords.
I know.
Lyra touched the tiny crack in the central stone.
I've been able to maintain mental barriers against the worst of its influence. But I can't remove it. The clasp sealed itself after he placed it on me.
That absolute...
Zara cut off the insult, visibly restraining her anger.
Why haven't you told your father?
Lyra gave her a pointed look.
Would you go to High Councilor Embersong and tell him your politically advantageous marriage alliance might be compromised because your fiancé is using forbidden enchantments to ensure your cooperation?
Point taken,
Zara conceded.
But Lyra, this is serious. If he's using magic to manipulate you before the marriage...
I know.
Lyra interrupted.
And it connects to whatever the ancestors were warning about. The timing is too coincidental.
The spirit mage Cassius, does he know?
Zara asked.
He suspects something. He can perceive the necklace's enchantment somehow, though he hasn't said so directly.
Lyra hesitated.
I'm not sure how much to trust him yet.
Zara studied her for a moment.
Well, I did notice one thing during the introductions. When Alek stepped closer to you, the spirit mage's eyes followed him like a hawk watching a flame. Not with jealousy, with assessment, like he was cataloging a potential threat.
Before Lyra could respond, footsteps approached their alcove. Both women straightened, adopting the casual postures of friends sharing festival gossip rather than discussing forbidden enchantments and political conspiracies. Apprentice Mira Colborne, the same young girl who had brought Lyra her father's message yesterday, appeared at the alcove entrance. Her eyes widened at finding the High Councilor's daughter in such an informal setting.
Magister Embersong.
She executed a hasty bow.
High Councilor Embersong requests your presence in the festival planning chamber for the midnight procession arrangements.
Thank you, Apprentice Colborne.
Lyra replied with a gentle smile.
We'll attend him immediately.
As the girl hurried away, Zara raised an eyebrow.
At least that part wasn't a fabrication.
We should go,
Lyra said, adjusting her formal robes.
but this conversation isn't finished.
Not by half.
Zara agreed grimly.
And Lyra?
She caught her friend's arm as they stepped from the alcove.
Whatever happens, we'll figure this out. Together.
The simple affirmation filled Lyra with unexpected emotion. In a world of political calculations and power plays, genuine loyalty was precious beyond measure.
Together,
She agreed softly. The festival planning chamber buzzed with activity as guild officials finalized details for the night's midnight procession, the most visually spectacular event of the Ember Festival. Massive maps covered the central table, showing the procession route through Pyreholm's main thoroughfares. Smaller tables held miniature models of the elaborate fire constructs that would illuminate the celebrations. High Councilor Embersong stood at the center of this controlled chaos, issuing directions with the precision that had made him one of the Fire Guild's most effective leaders. He noticed their arrival immediately, excusing himself from a cluster of event coordinators to approach them.
Daughter Magister Cinderkin.
His formal greeting gave nothing away to the bustling room, but his eyes conveyed urgency.
Walk with me. There are procession matters requiring your attention.
He led them to a smaller adjoining room, where 3 spectacular ceremonial robes hung on display stands. 2 were clearly designed as a pair, one in masculine styling with sharp angles and bold embroidery, the other more feminine with flowing lines but matching color gradients and motifs. The third was simpler but no less elegant, designed for a secondary participant.
Your ceremonial attire for tonight.
He explained once the door closed behind them.
Yours and Lord Brightforge's to be worn as you lead the procession together.
He gestured to the paired robes, then to the third.
And yours, Magister Cinderkin, as representative of the festival committee.
Lyra examined the paired robes, noting the subtle symbolism woven into their design. Motifs representing the merging of 2 fire lineages, ancient symbols of prosperity and fertility. And most significantly, a recurring pattern that resembled stylized crowns worked in metallic thread that would catch and reflect firelight.
The crown motif is prominent,
she observed carefully.
Lord Brightforge suggested it.
Her father replied, his tone neutral.
To honor both families' historical significance in guild leadership.
Lyra met his gaze directly.
And the spirit seer? What were your impressions of Magister Nightshade?
Unconventional,
Doran said after a moment's consideration.
Knowledgeable, and remarkably forthright for a spirit mage. His reputation for disregarding political niceties appears well earned.
Is that a concern?
Zara asked.
Not necessarily.
Her father's expression revealed little.
Directness can be refreshing in investigations where others might hide behind diplomatic evasions.
He turned to Lyra.
What are your impressions of him?
The question caught her slightly off guard. Her father rarely solicited her opinions on diplomatic matters.
He's more grounded than most spirit mages I've encountered. His understanding of fire magic and its historical applications is unusually comprehensive for someone outside our guild.
Doran nodded slowly.
His approach to cross-guild magical theory is considered radical among the spirit faction. Elder Thorn mentioned as much during our initial discussions.
Radical how?
Lyra pressed, intrigued.
He challenges the fundamental assumption that elemental magics are inherently incompatible.
Her father's tone remained neutral, but Lyra detected a note of academic interest beneath his political caution.
His research suggests that elemental conflicts result from flawed application rather than inherent opposition.
This aligned with what Cassius had implied during their brief conversation, and with Lyra's own carefully concealed experiments combining elements of spirit techniques with fire magic.
That's why you selected him specifically,
she realized.
Not just for his skills in ancestral communication, but for his perspective on magical compatibility.
Her father's slight nod confirmed her deduction.
The ancestral warning mentioned enslaved flames. If the Crown of Cinders involves forcing incompatible magical elements to merge, someone familiar with cross-elemental theory might recognize patterns others would miss.
It was the closest her father had come to admitting the seriousness of the situation, and by extension, his concerns about Alek's research.
The midnight procession,
He continued, shifting topics with practiced ease,
will be particularly significant this year. As we lead into your engagement ceremony tomorrow, tonight's festivities establish the public narrative of your union with Lord Brightforge.
Lyra understood the subtext. Whatever private reservations her father might harbor about Alek's intentions, maintaining public appearances remained paramount. The political alliance between their families strengthened the Fire Guild's position too significantly to jeopardize without absolute certainty of threat.
What will be expected of me?
She asked, though she knew the traditional role well.
You and Lord Brightforge will lead the procession through the 5 ceremonial gates, fitting each with a combined working similar to the Great Pyre opening.
Her father's gaze flicked briefly to the necklace at her throat.
At midnight, you'll ascend the Ember Tower together to ignite the festival beacon, signaling to the other guilds that the Fire Guild celebrates its heritage.
The symbolic implications were clear. A public demonstration of their magical compatibility and unified purpose. Under normal circumstances, such a display would be merely ceremonial. Now, with the ancestral warning and Alek's enchanted necklace, it felt uncomfortably like walking into a trap.
And immediately following the procession,
Doran continued,
there will be a private meeting in my study. You, myself, Lord Brightforge, and Magister Nightshade, to discuss preliminary findings regarding the ancestral manifestation.
Zara looked concerned.
Is it wise to address such matters during festival celebrations? Emotions run high. Magic flows more freely.
Precisely why it's the perfect cover.
Doran replied with the calculated precision that had made him High Councilor.
No one will question magical fluctuations or unusual gatherings during the height of festival revelry.
His strategic thinking impressed Lyra, as always. While maintaining the appearance of focusing entirely on the festival and engagement, he was creating opportunities to investigate the warning without arousing suspicion.
Now,
He said, glancing toward the main chamber where voices had risen in volume.
I must return to the preparations. Magister Cinderkin, your assistance with the junior participants would be valuable. Lyra, you should return to our diplomatic guest. His access to the archives should be appropriately supervised.
The careful phrasing suggested both caution and opportunity. Ensure Cassius didn't overstep boundaries, but use the time to gather whatever insights he might offer.
Of course, Father.
Lyra inclined her head respectfully. As they prepared to depart, he added, almost casually,
The Spirit Seer mentioned wishing to examine some of the original guild separation documents. You might direct him to the Eastern Archives. The sealed section contains materials not generally shared with other guilds, but in this instance, historical context may prove valuable.
The permission to access restricted archives was significant. Another indication of how seriously her father took the ancestral warning. Lyra nodded her understanding of both the instruction and its implications. When they returned to the main chamber, Zara squeezed her arm gently.
Be careful,
she murmured.
And remember,
together.
Lyra finished for her with a grateful smile.
I know.
The diplomatic wing's guest study was designed to impress visitors while subtly reinforcing Fire Guild supremacy. Tall windows captured afternoon sunlight, warming the space to a temperature comfortable for fire mages, but slightly oppressive for those of other elemental affinities. The furnishings featured flame motifs and warm color palettes, beautiful but culturally specific. Even the books lining the walls represented carefully curated knowledge. Impressive but incomplete. Cassius Nightshade had apparently recognized these subtle power plays and countered them in his own quiet way. He'd opened several windows, allowing cross-ventilation that moderated the room's temperature. He'd rearranged the furniture slightly, breaking the formal symmetry that characterized Fire Guild spaces. And most significantly, he'd spread his own research materials across the central table, introducing elements of spirit scholarship into the carefully controlled environment. He stood with his back to the door when Lyra entered, examining an ancient map of pre-separation Eldervale that he must have brought with him. The silver gray of his robes caught the afternoon light, shifting between substantial and insubstantial as he moved.
The original ley line configurations were quite different from what we use today,
he said without turning, somehow aware of her presence.
Before the guilds formalized, magical energy flowed more freely between elemental concentrations.
Lyra approached the table, genuinely interested.
The standard histories claim the separation was natural, a response to elemental incompatibilities that made controlled magic impossible.
Standard histories,
Cassius replied, finally turning to face her,
are written by those who benefit from maintaining the established order.
His violet eyes held no judgment, merely thoughtful assessment.
Your father sent you to supervise my research?
To assist with it,
Lyra corrected, appreciating his directness.
He's granted access to the Eastern archives, including the sealed sections covering the guild's separation period.
Genuine surprise flickered across his features.
That's unprecedented. Those records haven't been shared with other guilds in centuries.
These are unprecedented circumstances,
Lyra replied.
4 ancestors don't manifest simultaneously for trivial reasons.
No,
Cassius agreed, studying her with renewed interest.
they don't.
He gestured to the materials spread across the table.
I've been comparing what little the Spirit Guild records say about the Crown of Cinders with the texts you gathered. There are intriguing correlations.
Lyra moved to his side of the table, maintaining a professional distance but close enough to examine the documents he indicated. A spirit text lay open beside one of the fire histories she had selected, both referring to artifacts from the pre-separation era.
This spirit account mentions bound flames that answer to crowned will,
Cassius said, pointing to a faded passage.
while your fire history references the crowned master of willing flames during the same historical period.
Different perspectives on the same phenomenon,
Lyra observed, her analytical mind immediately seeing the connection.
One emphasizing control, the other emphasizing partnership.
Exactly.
Cassius gave her an appreciative look.
Most fire mages would focus solely on the power aspects, missing the relationship dynamics entirely.
And most spirit mages would fixate on the binding elements, without considering the voluntary participation implied in the fire text.
Lyra countered, warming to the intellectual exchange. A smile curved his mouth. A genuine expression that transformed his serious features.
You're not what I expected, Magister Embersong.
Likewise, Magister Nightshade.
She met his gaze directly.
My father mentioned your theories on elemental compatibility challenge guild orthodoxy.
As do your private research interests, if your book selections are any indication.
His observation carried no accusation, merely shared recognition.
Few fire mages of your position would possess such comprehensive knowledge of cross-elemental theory.
The perception was uncomfortably accurate. Lyra changed tack slightly.
What do these historical references tell us about the Crown of Cinders specifically?
Cassius accepted the redirection smoothly.
That it was designed to create a relationship between wielder and flame that transcends normal magical bonds.
He tapped the spirit text thoughtfully.
Not mere control, which any skilled fire mage can achieve, but something deeper. A resonance that allows the wielder to access aspects of fire magic typically beyond reach.
Like ancestral flame connections,
Lyra suggested, thinking of her family's traditional affinity with inherited fire patterns.
Precisely.
Cassius looked impressed by her intuition.
The Embersong line is known for its unusually strong ancestral flame connections. If someone sought to amplify or manipulate those connections,
the Crown of Cinders would provide the mechanism,
Lyra finished, a chill running through her despite the room's warmth.
And my marriage to Lord Brightforge would provide the access.
The necklace pulsed against her throat, as if warning her against this line of thinking. Lyra reinforced her mental barriers automatically, a gesture that didn't escape Cassius's notice.
that necklace,
He said carefully.
appears to respond to certain thoughts or discussions.
The moment of decision had arrived. Lyra considered her options swiftly. Continue maintaining formal distance, or risk trusting this unusual spirit mage with knowledge that could help unravel the growing mystery.
It does,
she admitted finally.
It attempts to influence my emotions regarding Lord Brightforge, creating artificial warmth while redirecting critical thoughts.
Rather than appearing shocked, Cassius nodded as if she'd confirmed a hypothesis.
I suspected as much. The magical signature is subtle but distinctive, a variation on ancient binding enchantments with emotional modification components.
You can perceive that just by looking?
Lyra asked, surprised by his specific assessment.
Spirit mages perceive magical intentions as well as effects.
He explained.
It's why emotion-based enchantments are particularly visible to us. They exist in the borderland between physical and spectral realms.
He studied the necklace with professional interest.
The craftsmanship is remarkably sophisticated. Lord Brightforge possesses skills beyond traditional fire magic.
Can it be removed?
Lyra asked, the question emerging more vulnerably than she'd intended. Cassius's expression softened slightly.
Not easily, and not without understanding its complete enchantment structure.
He hesitated.
I would need to examine it more closely.
The request carried obvious intimacy. He would need to touch the necklace while it lay against her skin. Under normal circumstances, such proximity between unmarried mages of different guilds would be considered scandalous. Under these circumstances, it seemed necessary.
Here?
She asked, glancing toward the door.
Perhaps somewhere with greater privacy.
Cassius suggested.
And magical shielding. Attempting to counter the enchantment might trigger defensive measures.
Lyra thought quickly.
My research tower has both. We could access the Eastern archives through its connecting passage afterward.
Decision made, they gathered the most relevant materials and departed the guest study. As they walked through the diplomatic wing toward the Eastern District, Lyra found herself acutely aware of Cassius beside her. Not with the artificial warmth the necklace tried to induce regarding Alek, but with genuine intellectual curiosity and growing professional respect. Unlike most mages she encountered, he addressed her ideas directly rather than reacting to her family name or position. He engaged with her analytical observations rather than offering patronizing simplifications. And most refreshingly, he seemed to value precision and truth over political expediency. A rarity in guild circles regardless of elemental affiliation.
Your father is an interesting man,
Cassius commented as they turned onto a less traveled corridor that would lead to her tower.
More complex than his public reputation suggests.
How so?
Lyra asked, curious about his perception.
He maintains the traditional fire mage persona, authoritative, somewhat rigid, power-focused, but his actions reveal more nuanced thinking.
Cassius glanced at her.
Engaging a spirit seer with unorthodox views, granting access to restricted archives, supporting his daughter's unconventional magical interests, at least tacitly.
You've determined all that from one meeting?
Lyra couldn't hide her surprise at his perceptiveness. Cassius smiled slightly.
Observing relationships reveals more than formal introductions ever could. The way he looks to you when magical theory arises. The space he allows for your diplomatic interventions. Small gestures that suggest respect beyond mere paternal indulgence.
His assessment aligned with Lyra's own understanding of her complex relationship with her father. The unspoken support beneath the formal expectations. The private encouragements alongside public demands for perfection. Few people recognize these subtleties beneath Lyra Embersong's imposing exterior.
You're unusually observant for someone focused on the dead,
she noted, allowing a touch of humor into her voice.
The dead reveal much about the living.
Cassius replied with matching lightness.
Particularly what the living try to conceal.
They reached the base of her tower, where the ruby-flecked stairs recognized her magical signature, and glowed softly in response.
These are beautiful,
Cassius observed, examining the enchantment with professional appreciation.
Personal modifications.
Lyra nodded, impressed that he'd recognized her magical touch.
The original enchantment was more ostentatious. I preferred something subtler.
Effectiveness over display,
he murmured, following her up the spiral staircase.
A rare preference among fire mages.
At the top, Lyra placed her palm against the door, feeling the enchanted wood warm beneath her touch. The wards recognized her magical signature and disengaged with a soft click. The circular room beyond remained as she'd left it that morning. Organized chaos of books, research instruments, and partially completed magical diagrams. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the narrow windows, highlighting dust motes that danced in the air like tiny embers. Cassius paused on the threshold, his violet eyes taking in the space with evident interest.
Your sanctuary,
He observed quietly.
where you pursue the questions others don't ask.
The perception was so accurate it momentarily unsettled her.
How did you know?
He gestured to the room's contents. The unusual arrangement of research materials. The modified instruments calibrated for precise measurements rather than impressive displays. The books positioned for reference rather than decoration.
This is a working space, not a showcase.
He said simply.
Everything serves function over form. It reveals a mind that values substance over appearance, unusual in guild society, regardless of elemental affiliation.
As he moved further into the room, examining her collection with the respectful curiosity of a fellow scholar, Lyra found herself studying him with growing interest. Cassius Nightshade embodied similar contradictions to her own. Formally part of guild structure, yet intellectually independent. Outwardly conforming to expectations while privately challenging them.
Your instruments.
He noted, pausing before her modified magical resonance detector.
They've been calibrated to measure cross-elemental interactions.
It wasn't a question, but his tone invited explanation rather than demanding it.
A personal research interest.
Lyra acknowledged carefully.
The traditional theory that elements fundamentally oppose each other has always seemed incomplete to me.
Because it is.
Cassius turned from the instrument to face her directly.
The guilds enforce separation, not because elements naturally conflict, but because combined magical approaches threaten established power structures.
The statement was boldly heretical by guild standards. The kind of claim that could damage or end a promising career if voiced publicly. Yet he offered it matter-of-factly, seemingly unconcerned about her potential reaction.
You speak dangerous ideas very freely, Magister Nightshade,
Lyra observed, neither agreeing nor disagreeing.
As do your research materials, Magister Embersong.
He countered with the hint of a smile.
Though perhaps more discreetly.
Their eyes held for a moment. Mutual recognition passing between them. Two scholars whose investigations had led them to similar, unorthodox conclusions, finding unexpected validation in each other's perspectives. The necklace at Lyra's throat pulsed suddenly, almost aggressively, breaking the moment with its artificial heat. She grimaced, pressing her hand against it.
It's getting stronger,
Cassius observed, his expression shifting to professional concern.
The enchantment may be programmed to intensify when certain conditions are met.
Like discovering its true purpose,
Lyra suggested dryly.
Or forming connections with those who might interfere with its intended outcome.
He added, moving closer.
May I?
Understanding his request, Lyra nodded, tilting her chin slightly to provide better access to the necklace. Cassius approached with professional detachment, though she couldn't help noticing the clean scent of his robes, something herbal and earthy rather than the floral perfumes favored by most spirit mages. He raised his hands, not quite touching the necklace but framing it from either side. His violet eyes clouded over as he accessed deeper spectral perception, his breathing slowing to a measured rhythm.
Remarkable construction.
He murmured, his voice taking on a slightly distant quality.
Multiple enchantment layers. The visible ones create emotional influence, artificial affection, physical response, loyalty impulses. But beneath those,
his brow furrowed in concentration.
There's something else. A connection being formed, a pathway of sorts.
To what?
Lyra asked quietly, acutely aware of his proximity.
Not to, through.
Cassius corrected, his clouded eyes still focused on the necklace.
Your ancestral flame connection. The opals are mapping it somehow, creating a secondary channel that parallels your natural abilities.
The implications sent a chill through Lyra that countered the necklace's persistent warmth.
A way to access Embersong ancestral magic without my conscious participation.
Precisely.
Cassius's eyes cleared as he lowered his hands, stepping back to a more formal distance.
The emotional manipulation is merely the surface function. The true purpose appears to be creating magical access to your ancestral connections that would be strengthened by formal marriage bonds.
And combined with the Crown of Cinders,
Lyra began, her analytical mind racing ahead.
It would potentially allow control of not just your ancestral flame patterns, but all fire magic connected to your lineage.
Cassius finished grimly.
A concerning prospect, given your family's significant position within the guild.
The enormity of Alek's scheme began to take shape. Not merely a political marriage to enhance his standing, but a calculated magical working designed to access and potentially control Embersong ancestral power. The necklace was just the first step.
The midnight procession,
Lyra said suddenly, remembering her father's description of the ceremony.
Alek and I are expected to perform combined workings at each ceremonial gate, culminating at the Ember Tower at midnight.
A perfect opportunity to strengthen the magical connection the necklace is establishing.
Cassius agreed, his expression grave.
Each working would reinforce the pathway, especially in locations of historical significance to the Fire Guild.
Lyra moved to the window, looking out over Pyreholm as afternoon began to fade toward evening. Festival preparations were visible throughout the city, lanterns being hung, performance stages constructed, ceremonial fires prepared for lighting. What should have been a celebration now felt like elaborate stagecraft for a dangerous magical working.
We need to examine those archives,
she said decisively, turning back to Cassius.
If the Crown of Cinders is the key to whatever Alek is planning, we need to understand exactly what it was designed to do.
Cassius nodded, his violet eyes holding hers with shared purpose.
And quickly, before the midnight procession provides the next component for whatever working he's constructing.
Lyra pressed her hand to the necklace as it pulsed again, more aggressively than before.
It seems to be responding to our discoveries. The more we understand, the more it tries to influence me.
Cassius studied her with concern.
I might be able to help, at least partially. Spirit magic includes techniques for creating mental shields against external influences.
He hesitated.
But it would require more direct intervention than my earlier examination.
What kind of intervention?
Lyra asked, straightening her posture with determination.
I would need to establish a temporary connection between our magical signatures,
he explained, his tone professionally detached despite the intimacy of what he was suggesting.
It would allow me to help construct a shield around your core consciousness, your heart-mind connection, as spirit mages call it.
Lyra understood the significance of such a procedure. In guild society, allowing another mage, particularly one from a different elemental affinity, to touch one's magical core was an act of profound trust, typically reserved for family members or formal magical partnerships.
Would it remove the necklace's influence completely?
She asked.
No.
Cassius admitted.
The enchantment is too deeply integrated with your physical form for complete neutralization without removing the object itself. But I could help shield your conscious mind from its manipulations while you're awake.
He added with careful precision.
The physical effects and dream state influences would likely remain, and the shield would be weakest when your conscious defenses are down, during sleep or extreme emotional states.
Even partial protection would be valuable. With the midnight procession approaching and 2 days until the engagement ceremony, any advantage could prove crucial.
Do it,
Lyra decided, meeting his gaze steadily. Cassius nodded, his expression shifting to focused concentration.
You'll need to lower your natural magical barriers, not completely, but enough to allow a controlled connection.
Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on her inner magical structure. The carefully maintained shields that every trained mage developed to protect their core energy from external manipulation. Gradually, deliberately, she created a small opening in those defenses, just enough for the procedure Cassius had described, while maintaining protection against deeper vulnerability.
Ready,
She said softly, opening her eyes to find him standing before her.
I need to make physical contact.
He explained, raising his hands slowly.
Over your heart, to access the central channel where the necklace's influence flows deepest.
Lyra nodded, acutely aware of the intimacy of the gesture, as Cassius placed his right palm flat against her sternum, just below her collarbone. Even through the fabric of her robes, the contact created an immediate resonance. Not the artificial heat of the necklace's enchantment, but something clearer and more focused, like the first breath of cool air after leaving an overheated room. His eyes clouded over with that now familiar spirit sight, his breathing slowing to match hers in perfect synchronization. The magic that flowed from his palm felt unlike any she had experienced before. Neither hot nor cold, neither solid nor insubstantial, but existing somehow between states, between elements.
Your barriers against the enchantment are remarkably strong already.
He murmured, his voice taking on that distant quality she had noted during his examination of the necklace.
Most mages would have succumbed completely to its influence by now.
Lyra felt a strange dual awareness developing, her physical senses registering his proximity, the pressure of his palm against her chest, while simultaneously perceiving the subtle magical working he was creating within her energy structure. Layer by layer, he was weaving a protective shield around her core consciousness, using her existing mental barriers as foundation, but reinforcing them with spirit techniques that the necklace's fire-based enchantment couldn't easily penetrate. The sensation was peculiar, slightly dizzying, but not unpleasant. Where her own magical defenses felt like controlled flame, carefully shaped by will and training, Cassius's additions felt like mist, adaptable, permeable to what she chose to allow, but capable of dispersing harmful influences before they reached her center. As the working progressed, Lyra became increasingly aware of Cassius himself, not just his physical presence, but glimpses of his magical essence. Unlike the overwhelming force of Alek's magic, which sought to dominate and direct, Cassius's energy was more complex. Disciplined, yet flexible. Powerful but not imposing. Deeply layered with knowledge and experience that belied his relatively young age.
Almost complete.
He said after what might have been minutes or much longer. Time seemed strangely fluid during the procedure.
I'm anchoring the shield to your own magical signature so it will sustain itself rather than requiring my continued presence.
The necklace pulsed against her throat, as if sensing and resisting the protection being established. Lyra felt its heat intensify, sending another wave of inappropriate physical response through her body, despite the mental clarity Cassius's shield was providing. The dichotomy was strange. Her mind clear and focused while her body responded to the enchantment's physical promptings. Cassius's eyes cleared as he completed the working, though he maintained contact for a moment longer, ensuring the shield was properly integrated with her natural defenses. When he finally withdrew his hand, Lyra felt the absence as a brief coolness before her own magic adjusted to the new structure.
It's done,
He said, stepping back to a more appropriate distance.
How does it feel?
Lyra took inventory of her sensations. The necklace still pulsed warmly against her skin, still sent occasional waves of physical heat through her body. But her thoughts remained remarkably clear. No longer fighting against the subtly redirected emotions and artificial affections the enchantment had been generating.
Like wearing armor made of mist,
she said, finding the description apt if somewhat poetic.
I can feel the necklace's physical effects, but my thoughts are protected. Clearer.
Cassius nodded, satisfied.
The shield should hold while you're conscious and focused. During sleep, or if you experience extreme emotional states, it may thin temporarily. And the physical responses?
He hesitated, a faint color touching his cheekbones.
Those are directly tied to your body's natural systems. Spirit magic can shield the mind, but has limited effect on physical reactions.
Even partial protection is more than I had.
Lyra said, genuinely grateful.
Thank you.
Their eyes met, and Lyra felt a moment of connection deeper than professional cooperation. A recognition of shared purpose and mutual trust that the procedure had unexpectedly fostered. Unlike the artificial warmth the necklace had tried to generate toward Alek, this felt authentic. A natural alignment of minds that understood each other. The moment passed as Cassius moved toward her research table, his manner returning to scholarly focus.
We should proceed to the archives.
He said, gathering the materials they had selected earlier.
The shield will help you think more clearly about what we discover.
Lyra nodded, touching the necklace briefly. Through Cassius's shield, she could now perceive the enchantment's structure more distinctly. The layers of magical binding, the emotional manipulations, and beneath them, the deeper purpose of creating access to her ancestral flame connections. Knowledge that would prove crucial in countering whatever Alek planned to accomplish during the midnight procession.
Yes,
she agreed, moving toward the hidden staircase that connected her tower to the archives below.
We need to understand exactly what the Crown of Cinders was designed to do, and how to prevent Alek from using it.
As they descended the narrow steps together, Lyra felt a new clarity of purpose. With her mind shielded from the necklace's manipulations, and an unexpected ally at her side, perhaps she could do more than merely resist Alek's schemes. Perhaps she could reclaim control of her magic, her future, and the ancestral heritage that Alek sought to exploit for his own ambitions.